disaster of biblical proportion.
What do you mean, biblical?
What he means is Old Testament, Mr.
Yes.
Mayor. Real wrath of God type stuff.
Exactly.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
Want to build a deck full of cute cats? Or how about a deck full of awesome dogs? Well, as of Magic's newest set, Core Set 2021, you don't have to choose. Rin and Seri Inseparable is a 4/4 legendary creature, dog, cat. It costs 1, a red, a green, and a white to cast. And its abilities are, whenever you cast a dog spell, create a 1/1 green cat creature token. And whenever you cast a cat spell, create a 1/1 white dog creature token. You can also pay a red, a green, and a white and tap it for its activated ability, where it deals damage to any target, that means any creature, any planeswalker, or any player, equal to the number of dogs we control, and then we gain life equal to the number of cats we control. So in this budget deck guide, we're going to cover how to build a fun and powerful Rin and Seri commander deck for just $75. Now that $75 has an asterisk next to it because at the time of recording this, Rin and Seri don't actually have a price tag yet. So what I did is I built a $65 deck and left $10 open in the budget to cover buying Rin and Seri. And really, Rin and Seri isn't going to see play in Standard, so it's likely to be closer to $5. So let's just say you may have a little bit of room pre-built into your budget if you want to make some upgrades. Rin and Seri's activated ability isn't what we'll be primarily building around, but it is pretty powerful. The fact that we can point the damage at anything means we have built-in removal for our deck from our command zone, allowing us to easily snipe down any problematic creatures, planeswalkers, or even other commanders. And if we have a lot of dogs, we can even just point all that damage at our opponent's faces and kill them directly. But the most powerful aspect of Rin and Seri is pretty obvious. You can play cats to make free dogs, and you can play dogs to make free cats. The ability to generate 1/1 cats and dogs for 0 additional mana is actually way more powerful than it may seem at first glance, especially in this deck, which aims to gain the maximum amount of value from all our fuzzy friends. But first, we need to address a couple of elephants in the room. The dog creature type is being introduced with the upcoming set Core 2021, but kinda weirdly, that doesn't mean there's no dogs from the history of Magic. Hound has been an existing creature type in Magic for a long time, and as of Core Set 2021, the Hound creature type is being replaced by the dog creature type. That means that all existing Hounds are now dogs instead. So even though dogs are just now being introduced to the game, there are some existing dogs from the history of Magic for us to work with. Now, the second thing we need to address is, opposite to real life, in Magic, cats are just better than dogs. You see, a few years back, WotC really stepped up on supporting cats as a tribe, while dogs are more or less just kinda getting started. This is maybe the most obvious by looking at the number of cat lords versus the number of dog lords. In Magic, Lord is a term to describe a creature that buffs creatures of the same type. The lords in our deck are very, very powerful, just like in any tribal deck, as they're able to buff up our 1/1 tokens into actual sizable threats, allowing us to swarm over the board and overwhelm our opponents. Our basic cat lords include Feline Sovereign, Kahira, and Regal Caracal. These three all buff our cats by +1/+1, doubling up the stats of our 1/1 tokens, and turning our big cats into even scarier threats. And these three also give additional unique benefits to our cats. Kahira gives our cats Vigilance, and Regal Caracal gives our cats Lifelink, both really great defensive abilities. Caracal in particular can save us from some really sticky situations. Caracal letting us swing in with all of our cats and gain 20, 30, 40 plus life can easily pull us out of a losing position. And Feline Sovereign's secondary buff is actually incredibly powerful, allowing us to blow up problematic artifacts and enchantments just by clawing up our opponents with our cats, which we want to be doing anyway. So if an opponent has an artifact or an enchantment that just needs to be destroyed before it takes over the game, we can swing in with them at all of our cats, and as long as at least one makes it through, we get to blow up what we need to. Or maybe even more powerfully, Feline Sovereign actually triggers separately for each opponent. So if we spread out our cats and we hit each of our opponents with at least one cat, we get to blow up an artifact or an enchantment from each of them. And even if we're just blowing up some mana rocks, that's some really awesome free value. We also have some less conventional cat lords, like King of the Pride. King of the Pride gives our cats an insane buff of +2/+1, turning even our little 1/1 kittens into an army of really terrifying threats pretty quickly. And Pride Sovereign is kind of a reverse lord, turning itself into a gigantic threat based on the number of cats we have, instead of the other way around. Pride Sovereign can also tap and exert itself to pump out some more cat tokens, which is some really great fuel for our go wide theme. And we're also running some cats that just sort of fill in some basic functions of our deck, like Oresco's Explorer, which is a great card to ensure we never miss our land drops. Essentially, if we're not going first, we're going to naturally be behind on lands compared to at least one of our opponents. And a 2-mana 2/2 cat that draws us a plains, makes a dog token, and also benefits from all of our tribal synergies is already a great deal. We're also running a set of bounce lands, which are just kind of great budget dual lands, but should also allow us to get behind 2 or even all 3 of our opponents on number of lands pretty regularly. And if we are behind a number of lands and Explore draws us 2 or 3 planes, that's incredible value, and it pretty much guarantees that we won't ever be missing any of our important land drops. We also have some cats that act as artifact and enchantment removal, which is a very potent ability to just have on tribal bodies that we want to be using anyway. Quasali Slingers in particular is an extremely powerful card in our deck, as not only will it blow up an artifact or an enchantment every time we play a cat, but its ability will also be triggered by cat tokens made by Rin and Seri, meaning casting our dogs will be able to blow up artifacts and enchantments too. So those are some of our utility cats and our cat lords, and now let's take a look at some of our dog lords. Or rather lord. There's actually only one dog lord in the game, and it's Pack Leader. Pack Leader gives all of our dogs +1/+1 and allows us to attack with all of our dogs with 0 fear. Because if he leads the charge, he prevents all combat damage that will be dealt to our dogs, including himself. Now, the reason I wanted to compare the number of cat lords to the number of dog lords isn't just to pick on dogs, but to show that cats currently have a lot more support in Magic than dogs, and that means our deck is going to have significantly higher number of cats than dogs. But this actually means Pack Leader might be the single strongest lord in our deck. Rin and Seri gives us a dog token whenever we play a cat, and vice versa. So the fact that we're running more cats means we're going to be swarming the board with a ton of 1/1 dog tokens. Pack Leader boosting all those pups and allowing them to never lose in combat makes him a really potent lord in our deck. And I actually think it's kind of exciting that dogs are just kind of starting their journey to real tribehood. If you look at where cats were just a few years ago, just like dogs, they were pretty much an unsupported tribe. But WotC has spent the last few years slowly trickling out more and more support for cats, and now they're one of the better tribes in Magic. And I'm sure that dogs are going to follow that same trajectory in the coming years, and having a deck that's going to be constantly getting upgrades and new lords and new good tribe members, and just new cards in general to play with is one of the hallmarks of a really awesome budget commander deck in my opinion. Now, because we're split between 2 different tribes, the generic tribal cards we're running are the ones that can benefit both tribes at the same time. Descendant's Path, for example, allows us to look at the top card of our deck during our upkeep, and if it's a creature card that shares a type with a creature we control, we get to cast it for free. That's what I mean by benefiting both tribes. A lot of generic tribal cards in Magic require you to name a tribe as you cast them, and then they only benefit that one tribe, but Descendant's Path snags both cats and dogs for free off the top of our deck. And what's more, Descendant's Path actually casts them for free, instead of just putting the creature onto the battlefield. So if we have our commander out on the battlefield when Descendant's Path casts the top card of our deck, we still get those free tokens. In a similar vein, we're running Heirloom Blade. Again, Heirloom Blade benefits both of our tribes without needing to pick either a cat or a dog. We can just equip Heirloom Blade to any of our creatures for a pretty sizable +3/+1 boost, and then whenever that cat or dog or Catdog dies, we get to reveal cards off the top of our deck until we find a cat or a dog and put it into our hand. These non-specific tribal cards allow us to run both of our tribes without feeling like we're just playing a cat deck with some dogs thrown in or vice versa. Now, even though the tribe is just starting out, we are running some dogs in our deck. Resolute Watchdog and Selfless Savior are both 1-mana dogs with activated abilities that allow us to sacrifice them to save another creature. This is not only great protection for our commander and our other big threats, but just being 1-mana dogs is pretty fantastic with Rin and Seri. If we have a Rin and Seri on the battlefield, then any 1-mana cat or 1-mana dog is going to basically be a 1-mana dragon fodder. 1 mana for 2 1/1 bodies is a really good rate, especially because we have a lot of tech packed into our deck to take advantage of those 1/1s. Skull Clamp, for example, is perhaps the singularly most powerful card in our deck. It's an equipment that costs 1 mana to cast and costs 1 mana to equip. Skull Clamp gives the equipped creature +1/-1 and says if the equipped creature dies, we get to draw 2 cards. Now, just on its face, that's pretty good. Equipping up one of our valuable creatures so that if it dies, we get to draw some cards is a good way to disincentivize removal spells or recover from board wipes. But the real trick to Skull Clamp is how it interacts with 1/1s. Say we play our Sacred Cat. Rin and Seri then gives us a free 1/1 dog. We can pay 1 mana, equip Skull Clamp to Sacred Cat. The Sacred Cat gets +1/-1, which means its toughness goes to 0 and it immediately dies. Since it dies, we get to draw 2 cards, and then we can do the same thing with the dog token, drawing 2 more cards. So with Skull Clamp, our commander isn't just giving us free 1/1s anymore, it's giving us an absolute truckload of card draw, which is so incredibly important to have in Commander. And that's why we have a ton of effects to turn Rin and Seri's ability to spit out an army of little creatures into card advantage. Shamanic Revelation and Camaraderie both allow us to draw cards equal to the number of creatures we control, easily allowing us to draw 5, 10, 15 cards to refill our hand and keep swarming the board. And with Rin and Seri giving us a free token every time we cast a cat or a dog, Idol of Oblivion essentially means we get to be drawing an extra card every turn for 0 additional mana. Path of Discovery is another huge source of card advantage and card selection in our deck, because unlike most abilities similar to it, Path of Discovery triggers for both non-token and token creatures. That means with Rin and Seri out, every cat and every dog we cast is going to double trigger Path of Discovery, giving us 2 explore triggers and letting us dig through our deck like crazy. And this token production really brings us to the main strategy of our deck: go wide. We're looking to put as many creatures onto the battlefield as possible, and then, using the buffs from our lords and our card advantage engines, win the game with all those creatures. So we're running cards like Second Harvest, which just straight up doubles all the tokens we have, and can turn a scary board into a lethal one out of nowhere. Even the board wipes we're running are tailored around our go wide theme. Dusk only wipes away creatures with power 3 or greater, which means we can wrath away all the most problematic threats while leaving our big board of 1/1 tokens just fine. Similarly, Hour of Reckoning will not only regularly be 2, 1, or even 0 mana to cast in our deck, but it also leaves all of our tokens alive, meaning we don't have to blow up our own game plan if we have to board wipe. And Dusk's Aftermath half, Dawn, is also pretty great in our deck. We generally build up big threats by stacking up a lot of lords or playing some big buffing spells to swing in for lethal, and we'll cover those big buffing spells in a bit. But in the graveyard, the vast majority of our creatures are going to have 2 power or less. That means Dawn can let us recover from a massive setback, completely refilling our hand with action and putting us back into a game we might have otherwise had no chance in. We also have some sweet mana sinks in the deck to just keep churning out tokens. Whitemane Lion is a fantastic example of this. We can use Whitemane Lion as it's intended, flashing it in to save a creature from a removal spell or returning a creature with a good enter the battlefield ability to our hand to reuse it. But there's another trick with Whitemane Lion. It can return itself to our hand. So every time we've got an extra 2 mana open, we can flash in Whitemane Lion, it'll create a 1/1 dog token thanks to our commander, and then we can return Whitemane Lion to our hand, and if we've got more mana open, we can just keep doing that to just produce a massive amount of dog tokens without using up any cards. This is especially good if we've just drawn too many lands and too much ramp, and we're just kind of flooding out a bit. Having Whitemane in our hand means that all that extra mana isn't going to waste, and we can keep our game plan going. And this gets even better if we have a mana reducer like Thornscape Familiar on the battlefield. Thornscape Familiar is a fine ramp creature for our deck in general, but specifically with Whitemane Lion, it allows us to cast Reliant for only 1 white mana, meaning we can keep looping it for even cheaper and potentially make twice as many dogs. And then, even if we still draw no action, with that big army of dogs, we can potentially just start burning our opponents out with our commander's activated ability. And besides just going wide to draw cards, or to beat our opponent down, or to burn them out with our commander, we do have some trickery we can do with all of our tokens as well. Glare of Subdual is a sneakily powerful enchantment, allowing us to tap one of our creatures to tap a creature or an artifact our opponent controls. And because every one of our cat and dog spells is essentially doubled up by our commander, giving us 2 bodies, we can very easily use our fluffy army to keep our opponent's boards more or less completely locked down with Glare of Subdual. Outpost Siege is another sneaky way we can turn our army of little creatures into an unconventional threat. So usually, in the early game, we want to be playing Outpost Siege on its cons mode, as its cons mode basically just lets us draw 2 cards per turn, which is really good. But if we're in the late game and we draw Outpost Siege, we can cast it for its Dragon mode, which says whenever a creature we control leaves the battlefield, we can deal 1 damage to anything. That means if we slam Outpost Siege on its Dragon mode while we have a big board full of tokens, we can just start attacking with them super aggressively. If our opponents try to block and kill some of our tokens, for every one that dies, we get to ping any target we want, potentially burning away all their creatures or even pointing that damage right at their faces to finish the game. It can also mean that a board wipe doesn't save our opponents, because if they blow up our 20 cats and dogs, that's 20 damage coming right at their noggin. And one of my favorite cards in the deck that goes fantastically with our go wide theme is Marisi. Marisi prevents our opponents from casting spells during combat, which is good, but more importantly, Marisi says if a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, we goad all the creatures that player controls. Goading a creature means that creature is forced to attack during its player's next battle step, and if there are any other opponents still in the game, they have to attack them instead of us. So Marisi's Goad Everything ability is great for multiple reasons. Having so many creatures on the battlefield means we should be able to pretty easily slip in some combat damage, ideally against multiple opponents in a turn. And when we do, Marisi is not only forcing our opponents to kill each other, but all their creatures being forced to attack means they're going to be even more open and susceptible to damage next turn, letting us get in more damage and then goading them all over again, and etc, etc, etc. So you can see how we built this deck to make getting a free 1/1 with all of our cats and all of our dogs an extremely powerful perk. But imagine if we could cast our creatures and get 2 1/1s, both the cat and the dog token. To do that, we need to be casting spells that count as both cats and as dogs. And that's where Changelings come in. The Changeling ability gives spells every creature type, so every card with Changeling in our deck counts as both a cat and a dog. That means Changelings benefit from all of our cat lords and our dog lord, but even more importantly, casting a Changeling counts as both a dog and a cat, triggering both the token abilities of Rin and Seri. And Changelings also count as both cats and dogs for a commander's activated ability as well. Now let's take Universal Automaton for example. So we talked previously about how 1-mana cats and dogs were pretty powerful in our deck, because they're essentially 1-mana dragon fodders with tribal upside. Well, Universal Automaton goes a step further and gives us 3 1/1 bodies for 1 mana, meaning it's a 1-mana Hordling outburst with tribal upsides. That is an absolutely insane rate. Changelings also work really well with the generic tribal cards we're running. With any Changeling on the battlefield, Descendant's Path can cast any creature off the top of our deck, as Changelings are always going to share its creature types. And conversely, if we have any creature on the battlefield, we're going to be able to cast any Changeling for free off the top of our deck with Descendant's Path. Similarly, a Changeling equipped with Heirloom Blade is going to let us draw the next creature in our deck no matter what its types are. And also, any creature that dies with Heirloom Blade attached to it can find Changelings out of our deck via Heirloom Blade's ability. In most tribal decks, Changelings usually fill the role of kind of patching up any gaps, maybe if the tribe just doesn't have enough members. But in our deck, Changelings counting as both cats and dogs make them very, very potent cards. A regular cohort gives us 4 tribal bodies for just 4 mana, 2 1/1s and 2 2/2s. And for 3 mana, Torian Mauler gives us 2 1/1 tokens and a 2/2. And then that 2/2 proceeds to grow into a gigantic threat. And we even have some Changeling instants with Shields of Elisfell and Blades of Elisfell. Usually combat tricks like this wouldn't really be playable in Commander, but these instants actually have Changeling, meaning even though they're non-creature spells, they count as both cats and dog spells. And with Rin and Seri on the battlefield, they'll be giving us both a cat token and a dog token when we cast them. Shields and Blades of Elisfell also bestow all creature types onto the creatures they buff, meaning not only do we get a couple of tokens and some buffs from using them, but our dogs become cats and our cats become dogs, so all of our lords will benefit all of our creatures. And with Shields in particular, there's even a sneaky combo with Feline Sovereign. We can use Shields on our opponent, turning all their creatures into dogs. That means our cats will have protection from all of their creatures, and protection means that they can't block our cats or deal any damage to our cats, which can allow us to blow out our opponent massively during combat, or even just swing through unblockably and kill them on the spot. My personal favorite Changeling spell is Crib Swap, which is another Changeling instant that counts as both a dog and a cat, and thus is going to get us both a dog and a cat token in instant speed. But Crib Swap is actually just really good as well, exiling any creature threat for 3 mana and getting 2 tribally relevant tokens at instant speed for 3 mana are both effects that are almost worth it on their own. So having them stapled together on one card thanks to Rin and Seri is very, very, very powerful. But our single best Changeling and one of the best finishers in our deck is Mirror Entity. Mirror Entity, like our other Changeling, comes along with the great bonus of getting 2 free 1/1s thanks to our commander, but Mirror Entity also has a very powerful activated ability. By paying X mana, we can make the base power and toughness of all of our creatures X. That means if we pay 5 mana, all of those 1/1 tokens we've been generating for free become an army of 5/5s, without even taking into account any of the lords or other buffs we may have on the battlefield. Additionally, Mirror Entity also bestows all creature types onto the creatures it buffs, once again turning all of our dogs into cats, all of our cats into dogs, and allowing all of our creatures to benefit off of all of our tribal payoffs. Effects like Mirror Entities, which buff our whole board of little creatures and allow us to swing in for an ungodly amount of damage, are the most reliable win condition in our deck. Jazal Goldmane is a cat that allows us to pay 5 mana to buff our whole board by the number of attacking creatures we control. So if we swing in with 10 1/1s and activate Jazal's ability, all of our attacking creatures will get +10/+10, and those little 1/1 kittens and puppies will become 11 11s. And there's no once per turn clause with Jazal, so if we have enough mana to activate him 2 or even 3 times, which is a lot easier than it seems in a deck with as much ramp as we have, we can make those pups and kittens into 21 21s or 31 31s, and it should be pretty hard not to kill the entire board in one swing with our creatures that big. We also have Return of the Wildspeaker as a flexible mass buff effect, giving all of our cats and all of our dogs +3/+3 across the board. Return of the Wildspeaker isn't as explosive, but it's very powerful because it can either be an overrun effect if we want to close out the game with a huge attack, or it can be a huge card draw spell, letting us build or rebuild if we're not really in a position where we can swing in just yet. And our biggest, baddest overrun effect, and maybe the strongest finisher in our deck, is an old classic, Titanic Ultimatum. Titanic Ultimatum gives all of our creatures +5/+5, first strike, lifelink, and trample. Again, if we have enough dog tokens and cat tokens on board, this should pretty easily be lethal and allow us to swing in for dozens and dozens of damage out of nowhere. But even if our opponents do have enough blockers on board to survive through Titanic Ultimatum, it makes those blocks horrible for them. +5/+5 in first strike means our opponent is going to have a very difficult time actually trading with our creatures profitably. And +5/+5 in lifelink means we're going to be gaining so much life that we're almost certainly going to survive any sort of crackback or counterattack. And +5/+5 in trample means they can't just chump block their way through it with little creatures, or they'll just take all that damage to their face. I think Ultimatum is not only an awesome and classic finisher, but really kind of embodies what this deck is all about. Building up a huge board of cats and dogs, and just exploding to victory with a gigantic, devastating, and pretty fluffy play. And so that's going to wrap it up for the deck tech for our budget Rin and Seri Inseparable Commander deck. Tribal Commander decks are always a lot of fun, and a double Tribal deck is even more awesome. I think Rin and Seri are a perfect combination of being a really cool tribe leader for a really beloved couple of tribes, and also just being a really powerful commander. What do you think about Rin and Seri? Have you put together a Rin and Seri brew of your own? And if so, is there anything you've included that you feel like I missed? Let me know. Anyway, this has been 2D, and I'll see you next time.